Beautiful. And Darius, don't need any introduction. You've already done a beautiful meeting with us earlier in the cohort. Um, a little bit more on the technical side and kind of what it's like to work at Modine, and now you're putting on the recruiter hat. So I appreciate it, and I'll hand it over to you to give kind of a standing out in your application and interview.
Yeah, definitely. You can ignore all those emails I'm getting. Um, yeah, so I'm here to tell you all how to land like an internship or a job in general. So I've got a little agenda here, and I'm just going to walk you through, first of all, what a hiring manager is looking for, how the job finding process works in general, and then how you can stand out and just do a good job in both your application and your interview. So just as another introduction to me, I'm Darius. I'm the lead electrical engineer for our department here at Modine, where we make, systems for electric vehicles, as you know. I've personally, man, I've lost count of how many people I've interviewed. It's in the dozens at this point, but I've personally helped fill, I think, about 15 roles, including like 9 interns. So I have a fairly decent grasp on this stuff, and I hope what I tell you is useful to you going forward. But yeah, let's just jump right in here. So, how do you stand out in your application and your interview? I'm just going to walk you through how the hiring process works first. This is something that is kind of opaque. When you're applying to jobs, a lot of the time, your only experience is you apply to the job, you wait a while, and someone comes back to you and says they want to interview you. So I'm going to give you a little peek behind the curtain at the process. So if I want to open a position like an internship or a full time or whatever, the very first thing I do is I create a job description. And whenever I create a job description, it's because I want to fill, a job. And we want to fill a job because we have a need. We know we're going to have some sort of need in the future, or we have a need we need to fill right now. And so I'll go in and I'll create a job description, basically just saying, what do I need from this person? What am I trying to accomplish with this goal? Once I've done that, I'll go over to HR or our recruiters who are either in our HR department or an external recruiting agency. For internships, it'll pretty much always be an internal HR recruiter. It's mostly for the more obscure places that you go to a recruiting agency for. And then that recruiter will then create a job posting online using your job description. There's also, especially for internships, you'll start going to career fairs and stuff like that, and you'll get applications that way. But either way, you create the job posting and you start recruiting and you start letting people apply. Then a bunch of people start applying. You tend to get dozens and dozens and dozens of resumes. However, most of those resumes are kind of weird. Like a lot of them are, I'll start up an electrical engineering internship job posting, and then I'll get a bunch of, like people who seem to be like, janitors or just random stuff that doesn't really apply. So it's HR's job to then screen those people out basically, and to basically say like, hey, thanks for applying, but you don't meet our requirements. And finally, after HR screens people out, they'll they will conduct little screening interviews. They'll call you up on your phone and just ask you some relatively generic questions. First of all, just are you eligible for the role in the first place? And then they'll they'll just ask some questions that the hiring manager gave them, basically. If they like the candidate, they will then forward their resume and their notes from that screening interview to the hiring manager, which would be me in this case. And then the hiring manager will review those resumes. At this point, you get maybe a dozen at most, so you're not going through a ton. If you like those resumes and you like the notes, you'll set up interviews with those candidates. And you'll go through the whole thing. You'll interview them. You might be on a panel where multiple people interview you. And then finally, after you've interviewed all those people and gone through this whole process, you have to choose which person best meets your needs and best fits in with your team. And then you send them an offer. So, what does this mean for you as a person who's applying? First of all, obviously, you need to apply to the role. If you don't apply to the role, obviously, you can't really get in. And second of all, you need to stand out. It's important to stand out because, like I said, in the initial process, HR is going to be getting up to, hundreds of resumes. And they are going to be screening out people who they don't think are qualified or who they don't think the hiring manager is going to like, basically. And part of that is you need to make, well, I'll go in over your resume a bit later, but you need to make your resume easy to read, and you need to show in some way that you are fit for the position. Finally, when HR calls you up, you got to convince them you're a good fit for the position. They're basically, the first screen you have to get through. So HR generally doesn't have much technical knowledge, but they'll ask you questions based on culture fit for the most part, and then just a few little technical questions. So it's your job in this case to convince HR that you are good to work with, basically, and that you'll fit in. Um, Now, fitting in doesn't necessarily mean that you're exactly the same as everyone there or anything, but I'll get back to that later. Finally, once you've gone through all that, you have to convince the hiring manager that you're a good fit with them. So the HR person tends to be a bit more focused on, culture, and then the hiring manager is a bit more focused on technical fit, although both matter to both the HR person and the hiring manager. All right, I'll open the floor for questions after every slide. Does anyone have any questions here?
I definitely have some around how to stand out, but I feel like I'm going to hold that one for a later slide.
Sure. Here's the importance of standing out.
Look at
So what
that.
did what did we learn from that last slide? So I talked about this a bit just now, but you know, people are going over dozens of resumes for every position, and they won't spend a lot of time going over any particular resume. In a few slides down, I've got some examples of my resumes that I'll go over, and I'll walk you through, basically how I read through a resume and how I judge a resume. Oop. Now, when you talk to a recruiter, they're going to care more about a culture fit. So when you initially get a screening interview, if it's with the HR or a recruiter and not the hiring manager, you need to be prepared for basically culture fit questions. You know, First of all, they're going to try to make sure you're not like a problem. You're not going to, discriminate against people. You're not going to, that you're not constantly interrupting them and talking over them. Just kind of basic social skill level stuff like that. And then managers will then care more about the technical skills and the culture fit, although that will also be very important to a manager is culture. So the manager will then ask you, technical questions. They'll ask you about, things on the job description, stuff like that. And I have a slide for that a bit later too. Now, finally, your resume's goal is basically to get you the interview. Um, how this works is you submit your resume gets you through all the screening stuff, and then it's your job to, in a discussion, in an interview, then convince people to hire you. So your resume needs to basically be tailor-made for just getting you the interview, and that should be what you're laser focused on in your resume. Now, what else? Like I said, you should be aiming to get the interview with your resume. And one way to do that is just to be interesting. Um, if you put something just exciting or funky or cool on there, sometimes, a manager will want to interview you, even if they don't think you check all the technical boxes, just because they think it's fun. One thing that once stood out to me is I saw a resume for someone who wanted to be an intern here at Modine, and they described a project where they made a motorized couch. They took like a dishwasher motor, and they took this big battery and they tried to power the dishwasher motor with the battery, and they made this like regenerative braking system where it would just dump the power back into the battery. And in on the resume they listed the project, and they listed like what they tried to do, and at the end it just said resulted in detonation. And I was just like, oh man, I have to interview this person now because I need to know what happened here. So that's one thing you can do to really stand out.
Yeah, and that's a
All right.
good example of kind of like showcasing your failure, but also you have a good point to talk about what you learned from that failure. So,
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great point. Like, they described a project that failed and that failed catastrophically, but it was still, it was showing that they were, doing interesting, fun things, that they had some level of some level of skill, but then also that they were, willing to admit that things failed and that they learned from it. And it was just
hmm,
interesting. Oh yeah, I
sounds like
should
a fun
ask.
interview.
Yeah, it was. Anyone have any questions about that last slide about standing out? I'll take that as a no. And yeah, just the one thing I want you to take from this slide is when you're trying to stand out, 99% of what that is you need to stand out enough to get to the interview. And then you need to be able to carry yourself through that interview to convince, the hiring manager that you're a good fit. And I got some more slides on that later. So yeah, crafting an impressive application. You know, First of all, you need to stand out. Um, you can do that with what I was just saying with interesting projects. But the main thing you want to do, especially to get past HR and the recruiter, is to just show that you check all the boxes. That's what the recruiter is going to do. That's the first filter, is just checking, do you meet the requirements for this position? So, you know, they're going to look for a culture fit and they're going to look for a technical fit. Um, the ways you can show you're a culture fit are basically anything extracurricular, anything that shows you can work in a team, things that show that, at least at Modine, that you value diversity, that, that this is not a very unprofessional way to put it, but that you're not like a chud. Um, but yeah, show off your extracurriculars, show off your community involvement. And then for technical fit, they're going to post that job description, and recruiters are going to be looking through your resume to see how you check off those boxes. So if they say, experience with PCB design, they're going to look for experience with PCB design on your resume. Even if they just put it in, rather than saying it's a job requirement, if they say, you know, in the job description, this is what you'll be doing. You will be writing C code for ARM microprocessors. You just say, oh, I wrote C code for, an Arduino. And it might not be an ARM microprocessor, but you still wrote C code for something. And the best way to show off those skills and how you meet those technical requirements is showing off experience. Experience can be, personal projects. It can be coursework you did. And it's just, you can list off just skills you've learned from past experience. Like, for example, oh, I'll show you a bit more in my resume in the next slide. But if you had a little home project with an Arduino where you blinked some LEDs, you can, if that's all you've got, you can put that on your resume, show that you've done that. And then if you want to add a skills section, you then say that you worked with Arduinos, you worked with C. The big point here, make your resume easy to read. I want to hammer that into your heads. Make it easy to read. I get so many resumes where if I really take the time to read them, they've got some good experience, they've got some good skills, but it takes me way too long to figure out what their skills are and what their experience is. Um, so this is the number one thing you got to keep in mind. Recruiters and hiring managers, they will typically skim over your resume very quickly. They're going to be like, okay, I need to meet these requirements for the role. Do they meet those requirements? And they'll just like read a few words out of every line and see like, okay, do they have PCB design experience? And if you do not have an easy to read, well formatted resume, it's going to be way too easy for them to pass over it. Basically, your job here is to make the recruiter and the hiring manager's life easier. You want it to be as easy as possible for them to see whether you check those boxes. When you're crafting the application, don't be humble. Really, really sell yourself, but also don't lie. Like if you worked on a project in like on a team and you say, I did all of this, like I did the whole powertrain on this, I don't know, this car in my Formula SAE club. But then when you get into the actual interview and they start asking, oh, cool, what did you do for this? What did you do for that? Can you describe what you did? And it turns out you can't talk about it at all. And it turns out all you did was like watch other people do it. People are going to find out. My advice to you is really live your life in such a way where you don't have to lie to get a job. Um, Maybe that's easier said than done, but don't lie. But also, don't be humble. I'll give you some examples. I've got some resumes that I wrote for myself in previous years. I'll give you some examples of how I sold myself and how I was not humble. Don't give any reasons to disqualify yourself. This is a big one. Big examples of this are just like if you have a terribly formatted resume, if you have just a ton of spelling and grammar errors, just things like that. You, when someone reads over your resume, first of all, they're going to be seeing whether you check all the boxes for the position, and then they're also going to be looking for red flags or just reasons to cut you, especially if the recruiter has, dozens and dozens of resumes and they don't really want to do a screening call for like, 20 different people. They will look for reasons to cut your resume. So just go over it, make sure there's nothing on there where you'd say like, would I really hire this person, or just no red flags in general. And finally, my another big piece of advice for you when you're crafting your resume or crafting your application is continuously work on your resume. Don't just write it once and then be done with it. Um, if as you do things, as you work on a project, add it to your resume, update it. If you going back to like a Formula SAE example, if you helped work on the powertrain, throw that on there. And then if you helped, program something on like a microcontroller for there, throw that on there too. And just continuously update it so that you're basically always ready and that you don't some examples of my previous resumes. I'm going to show you 3 different ones from different stages in my career. The first one is going to be before I ever even got an internship. Second one is going to be after I got my first internship, but before I got my second. And the third one is going to be something I wrote up quick for what my current resume is. And you can just see how it progressed and what I think I did a good job in and what I did a bad job in. And then also as a hiring manager, how I would be reading these resumes. But first, anyone have any questions over what I just said? I just talked for a good like 10 minutes, so I'll give you a chance to ask some questions.
I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for like listing, making it easy to read, would you, I guess like for how like, I guess if you have a professional skills section, would you like have bullet points, but then like maybe start with like coding and like, have a dash, like experience with coding, or would you have like bullet points with like each with a little, like a line about that, or how would you, I don't know, organize that?
That's a good question. I don't think there's any one way to write your resume, to be honest. What I actually recommend is write it however you think it would be good and then workshop it, try it out in different ways, kind of experiment a little. And, like I said, kind of make it a living document. You don't necessarily need to spend like 5 hours in one sitting making the perfect one. Just like every couple weeks, go back and tweak it. Be like, okay, I'm reading this. Is this easy to read? Do I do that? You can see here, I put a skills and experience section, and I just said, I kind of split it between, my programming proficiency, my proficiency with different programs, and there's this random thing about how I'm a fluent Dutch speaker. Um, And you can do it like this, or I could have said, coding, software. I don't know what I what I put on this one. Um, Either way, uh, just experiment, I guess, is my advice.
Or would you avoid listing your level of experience, like if you have limited experience? Or
Yes, yeah. One thing I don't really like seeing is if someone submits a resume and they've got like these little bar graphs on the side saying like I give myself an A+ with C programming, but a B- with Java. Like that's basically useless to me. Like when I evaluate your skills, I'm going to be evaluating them via interview questions, and just someone saying I'm good at Java. Or I'm an A+ in Java, it just isn't, it's not trustworthy or useful. So it's really just a waste of space.
so would you only
Yeah,
list
and that's
proficient? Sorry,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Carter.
would you only list something if you're proficient at it, or
Yeah, so basically you should be ready to answer questions about it in your interview. Um, what people are looking for in your resume are things that matter to the job. So if for example Python matters to the job, they're going to ask you, or if I'm applying using this resume and Python is relevant, they're going to ask me questions about Python, and I need to be ready to answer those questions, which means I actually need to have that proficiency. If Python is not relevant to the position, they don't care that it's on there. So this kind of goes back to lying. There is no advantage to lying on your resume because anything that actually matters, they're going to ask you about, and you're going to have to explain. And they're going to catch you out if you're not actually as proficient as you say you are.
okay, thanks.
Now, that doesn't mean to, going back to don't be humble. If For example, if I say I have some Python experience here, but all I've really done is write like 4 or 5 scripts, I can still put Python on my resume. I just need to be prepared in the interview to be like, oh yeah, I have a bit of Python experience, but I wouldn't say I'm super great at it. And so it would help to put it on there, but it goes back to being honest. Like if they ask you in the interview, like, what's your Python experience? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've got so much. I got years. I've made all sorts of apps. And then they ask you questions about it. You can't answer any. That's going to look terrible.
Yeah, and I think another good point is in terms of space, as you're kind of working through a living document, adding extra lines, you're kind of just competing for space. So really just once you're kind of at that entry level resume, you're just trying to get it all on one page and make the most out of what you're putting on that page. So space is another constraint that I think I've dealt with a lot when building my resume as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that comes back to making your resume easy to read. The biggest thing you can do to make it easy to read is to fit it on one page. And as if you're looking for an internship, you probably don't have enough experience doing things to actually make it more than one page. Um, so yeah, try to fit it on one page at first. However, as you go along, there's nothing inherently wrong about taking multiple pages. As long as it's not like a big packet of a million things. Here for my current resume, quote unquote, I've got enough stuff on here that I felt like it was worth taking up 2 pages, so I made it 2 pages. I'll go over this again in a minute. But yeah, just going over my resume. You know, I really want to pound into your head that you want to make it easy to read. And that's something that, I made this in 2017 when I was, I think, a sophomore in college. And my number one priority here was to make it easy to read. And it was also to show off projects. I just did a lot of random projects in college. So I had a lot to talk about. And so that's what I put here as basically the emphasis. Um, Before you have any kind of internship or anything, basically the only things you're going to be able to use to sell yourself are coursework and projects and extracurricular experience, like being in a club or something like that. So that's what you want your focus to be on. But anyway, so this was me as a sophomore in college back in 2017. This might have been 2016, actually. Um, and I was trying to get an internship. I had never had an internship before. I had never applied to any internships before. And so I needed to make a resume. And this was the first time I actually made a resume before. I had applied to other jobs, like to get into Quick Trip and Culver's and stuff, but I never actually had to put together like a resume. So I started and I asked myself, what can I actually put on here? I don't have any previous internship experience. I did join some clubs, but I wasn't super active in them. Like I was an IEEE and I'd attend meetings. So I didn't really do much, so I didn't want to put that on my resume. So what I had to talk about was basically just personal projects and stuff I've done on my own. And thankfully, I had a good number of those. Some of these were school projects. For example, this LED chaser, that was a freshman like intro to electrical engineering project. And I just threw that on there. Um, then I did some just some random like web app stuff. I made like a Twitch chat bot for a friend of mine, things like that. Now, the thing with all of these is none of them are particularly impressive when you get down to it. Like I made a little LED chaser, it was a little freshman project that took a couple weeks. You know, my Twitch bot it had some cool features, but it was honestly not very good, especially looking back at my old code now. But it was still stuff that I did, and it's still stuff that you know that that both shows that I'm capable of doing a project, I'm passionate enough to do a project, and then that I have some level of experience with a few different things. And now, so I made a short little description for each one. I put it all together. I unfortunately don't have any like old drafts of this to show you or anything. But it started off pretty rough, and then over time, I just went in and I read over my resume. Every couple days, I'd go back and be like, all right, if I was reading this, would I hire this person? And so I'd go in and be like, okay, it might be easier to read these projects if I bold the project name and then put the description in italics, and just little things like that. Um, and then I threw in some skills and experience. When you write your resume, I'm going to get back to how to read like a job description a little bit later. But when you write your resume, you want to basically tailor it to what you're applying to. And so you want to look at, the job description of what you're applying to, and you want to basically throw in like in a skills and experience section, how do I meet those? Now, later on in your career, or at least me, I actually got rid of my skills and experience section because I felt that as I worked on, my experience in certain positions spoke louder than if I had just made a section saying, like I can do C++, because I could then point to stuff over here and say, this is what I did C++ for. But as you're starting out, especially if you don't have any prior experience, you probably want to make a little skills and experience section because first of all, it'll help you just get past the recruiters. They'll look at the job description, they'll be like, yeah, I've got, C and C++. And then also it just gives you some talking points during your interview. All right, moving on a bit. This is 2019. This is after my first internship. I did a co-op at a company called the Volrath Company, and I just did some stuff. You can see here that I updated my resume a bit. I have some different projects. I basically added an ALU. This was also a school project with some hardware design, or it was an arithmetic logic unit, if you're wondering what ALU stands for. And I got rid of one of the old projects that I thought just wasn't that useful. The reason I did that was to make it fit on one page. I wrote all this, and I had to choose, what do I want to keep on my resume while still making it easy to read? So obviously I had an internship. I've had, now I have engineering work experience. That is the number one thing someone's going to be looking for when they interview me. So I got to put that up here front and center. I got to talk about what I did there and just things that might be applicable to future companies. And now that this is taking up a bunch of space, what do I get rid of in order to keep this one page? Because I still don't really have enough experience to make it worth updating this to 2 pages. So I look at it, I think, okay, what should I remove? First of all, what I can do is I can make this stuff smaller. So I made these smaller. I still added some nice spacing between things. I made it easy to read. I wanted to show that I have experience, working at places and working in teams and just stuff like that for, several years. But also it doesn't, working at a gas station, there's no real skills I want to put on my resume for that. I can talk about teamwork and stuff like that, but it's not worth putting on my resume. But it is worth just saying I did this at some point. So I made it smaller. They're all scrunched together here, but they're still on there. Second, I got rid of the skills and experience section. You got to keep in mind that your job here with this resume, what you want your resume to do is get you into that interview. And at this point, when I've got this experience, I can throw in, I guess, those buzzwords like C and C++ programming, PCB design, stuff like that, directly in this experience. And I don't really need that skills and experience section anymore because this kind of speaks for itself. And, if the standard page size, was bigger than 8 by 5.5 by 11 or something, I would add a skills and experience section, but you got to work with the space you have. And so you can see here, I've still got this big emphasis on readability. I bold certain things. I make certain parts bigger than the others. It's just easy to read. And then second, I show off experience I had. Now, finally, this is kind of a jump. It's from like 2019 to 2023. I just lost the resume I used to apply to this current position I'm in, which had another internship on it and stuff, unfortunately. But you can see over time how this evolved. In this case, right now, what I want to do is I want to emphasize my experience. I've been on kind of a strange career path where I got promoted very quickly after I graduated. So I actually dropped my education down to the bottom. I don't want it to be the very first thing people read that I only graduated 2 years ago, because then they'll think like, oh, Darius is inexperienced. I don't want him to be a senior electrical engineer. So I drop that to the bottom and I make them read through all my experience first before they read about my education. And so then here's where, not being humble comes in. You want to really sell yourself. If you do something cool, you want to put it on there. And so I just went ham on all this stuff. I'm the lead electrical engineer for all this. I'm the lead software engineer. I've done hardware and software development. I've done all this stuff. Look at me. I'm so cool. I've done all this stuff. But then I also just totally removed this stuff. I am no longer saying that I worked at Quick Trip Culver's and Dunkin' Donuts, because at this point, it's just not as useful anymore. Again, if the page was big enough, maybe I'd keep those on there, but I want to keep the important stuff on the first page at least, and then move the less important stuff to the second page. And I don't really want to, throw on the second page like I worked at Culver's. So just got rid of that stuff. It's just not really relevant anymore. So at this point, I had another internship at Milwaukee Tool, and then I was a teaching assistant at the University of Wisconsin just for a little while. So I throw that on there. You can see that I actually shortened the descriptions for Volrath. My description for Milwaukee Tool was actually much longer also before I got this job. But over time, I say make your resume a living document. You got to think of what you want to emphasize to people. So what I want to emphasize here is, I work in automotive in the electric vehicle industry, and I do all this cool stuff that's relevant to that. Basically, I wrote this resume to be appealing to other automotive companies. Basically, I wrote it to be appealing to like my current position here. Like if I was hiring a senior electrical engineer, this is what I'm looking for, basically. So, you know, this is kind of tailor-made for that. So if someone's, looking for an automotive engineer, I know that they want to know how to use the CAN bus. I know I want them to have some experience with industry standards like ISO 26262 and stuff like that. I may or may not be interested in high voltage brushless DC motor control, but if I am, it's on there. In this position, if I was hiring me, I would want to see that on there. Now, things that I don't have on here, I've done things like, put together wire harnesses, things like that. And if I was applying to a job where that was a big part of the job, I would add that as a bullet point here. I would say, designed and assembled wire harnesses. So, and then, I created a second page. I thought, I've got all this cool job experience, but I've got this cool stuff outside of my job too. And I kind of want to talk about it. I want it to be a talking point. And so I made a second page finally, after having just one page for the, years before that. And I just threw on all the extras basically in the second page. I've got some professional engagement stuff. I'm in the Society of Automotive Engineers and I do stuff for that. I wrote a paper with one of my professors, might as well throw that in there. And then more personal projects. You can see I just added a few things to that. Got this open source Python package, stuff like that. Next, I'm going to talk about a job description and writing your resume for the job description. But first, I'll take questions. Anyone got any questions? All right, sounds like a no. So here's a job description I wrote for electrical engineering co-op. It's basically an internship. What I did when I wrote this was I basically just copied the job description for just regular electrical engineer, and then I just adapted it a bit to be a bit more specific to interns. This is pretty typical for a job description. Job descriptions tend to have probably more bullet points than they should. There's going to be maybe 2 or 3 bullet points in here that are really critical, and the rest are kind of extra. For example, developing embedded firmware for electrical control and communication. That's a very, very important part of your job. You're going to be doing that a lot. However, things like participating in design meetings and communicating with your supervisor, stuff like that's honestly just kind of expected. Like you're going to have to do that as part of a job. And so when you're reading this, you want to focus on the critical aspects. You want to think, what parts of this, first of all, am I good at? Do I meet? And second of all, what is someone likely to ask me questions about in an interview or look for? Completing projects within an allocated budget, yes, that is a key responsibility of the job, but you're probably not going to get too many interview questions about that. You might get a question on like, hey, in your, in this school project you did, how did you stay on schedule for that? Or how did you deal with some schedule slip for that? But you're not going to get any kind of like, hard-hitting questions. And it's probably not going to be something people screen you for in your resume. So you want to see what on here is critical. And critical things that should go on your resume tend to be technical. They tend to be things like, component selection, schematic capture, PCB layout, stuff like that. So in that vein, if we're trying to develop a resume that targets this stuff specifically, we want to look through this job description and we want to choose what technical aspects of this do I meet. So I'm going to read through this. I'm going to say, okay, I need to design printed circuit boards. Have I ever done that? Have I, designed a PCB in like KiCad, for example? Or if I haven't done that, what have I done that is at least sort of related to that? What does designing a printed circuit board mean? You can do schematics, you can select components. So you think, when have I created an electrical circuit? When have I, put together an electrical circuit and had it work. When have I selected a component to go on that circuit? And so even if you haven't specifically designed a printed circuit board, you still have some stuff to talk about there. Now let's see if I have some examples here. So before I applied for my first internship, I had never designed a printed circuit board before. But if a job description said, you know, we want you to design printed circuit boards here, I need to think, how do I show that? And so one example would be this project, this LED chaser. I created an electronic circuit and it does this stuff. I was not targeting like PCB design when I made this resume, but if I was, I would have put, in the skills and experience, circuit design, circuit testing. If I had specifically done like PCB design, I would have had probably another bullet point for, PCB design, and I would have put, KiCad or Altium or whatever down here for the software I used for it. Another example could be, validating electrical components and systems. That's basically testing. Like, have I ever used a multimeter to test something? Have I used an oscilloscope? Have I used a power supply? Stuff like that. One critique I have of my resume here is I don't actually put any kind of experience or skills with those tools. So I didn't say, proficient with multimeters, oscilloscopes, stuff like that. Some of that is kind of just assumed in your electrical engineering degree. Most programs for electrical engineering will run you through that. But putting some stuff on there, even if it doesn't give you too many points with the hiring manager, it probably will give you points with the recruiter, and it will help you get past the recruiter to talk to the hiring manager. But then, something like complete projects with an allocated budget, you can put something like that on there, and you probably should if you don't have anything to fill the space. That's something I would call kind of like a space filler to help fill out your resume. You don't want it to be, big and bold on there, but if you don't have much else on your resume, you can put something on there like, completed projects within allocated budget and schedule, stuff like that. But if you have other stuff to put on there, I wouldn't really recommend it, just because that's kind of an assumed portion of any job. Does all of that make sense? Any questions?
I got one.
it.
So, go ahead, Carter. You go first.
Would you, like I said, would you keep like high school stuff on your resume? Like if you were very active in something like I don't know, well, it was first robotics for me. Would you? I mean, I'm still a sophomore, so I don't know. I mean, I'm sure at some point I would definitely want to remove that. But when do you think that point would be?
Yeah, absolutely, you should. This photo processor project here actually was a project from high school. I kind of wonder, do I still have that? Yeah, I still have that on my resume, like right now. So yeah, definitely. Any experience you have is useful. So First Robotics is great. I would love to see that. If I'm getting an application from a sophomore who, doesn't have a previous internship and they have experience with First Robotics, I would, I love that. Put it on there. Over time, as your resume becomes a living document, as you go through your career and you do more stuff, at some point it'll probably fall off your resume. But right now, absolutely put it on there.
Okay. Thanks.
Go ahead, Samuel.
Okay, I have a question. So, what kind of experience or personal project experience would you consider irrelevant to put in your resume?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is when I was in college, we had this little like business seminar about like, how to be an entrepreneur. And a bunch of people there were talking about how they were going to put like, I attended this seminar on their resume. And no, I I don't stuff like that just isn't that useful on your resume. Saying like I attended this, it doesn't really tell you much about yourself. It just means you showed up to like an event at some point. Other things, it really comes down to how easy your resume is to read. It's not actually the end of the world to have, something on there that's not relevant, as long as it's not crowding out the more relevant information. As long as it's still easy to find the relevant information, um, you can still put it on there. And a lot of stuff is relevant in the end, like just having community involvement in something. I've had some resumes come by, actually several, where they talked about just their involvement with their church and how they did like just stuff through their church and like homelessness outreach and stuff like that. And that's obviously not directly relevant to electrical engineering, but it does show that they can get along with people and like be part of a community. And so stuff like that is totally fine to put on there.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
When it comes to kind of matching your resume to a job, are you doing it for every single job, or are you kind of creating specific, I'll call it like entry level electrical engineering only, and that's kind of like a segmented, you can apply to similar jobs? That's kind of how I've done it in the past. Don't know if you have any different approaches.
Yeah, I do have a recommendation here. My recommendation, or what I did, was make one resume that just shows off like how cool you are and your experience, and just make it generic. Send that resume off to all the places you don't really want to work at, but that you're still like, your backup options. Or I'll get into this later, but I highly recommend interviewing at places you don't actually want to work at, just as practice for the interviews at places you do want to work at. So use that generic resume to, for those places. And then if you really want to work somewhere, like if you really wanted to work at Modine, for example, look at this and update your resume based on that and make like a Modine resume. Um, so, throw on like printed circuit board stuff, really emphasize automotive if you've done anything automotive, stuff like that. All right. So, how do you nail the interview? First of all, you should prepare. You should practice. Like interviewing is a skill like any other. The first time you do an interview, you're probably going to be nervous. You're not really going to know like what's going to happen. You have like no expectations, or you have weird expectations. That's totally normal. It's normal to be nervous and stuff. What helps is to just do it. Do more of it. Do it several times. Do it with as many companies as you can. During the career fair week at your college, talk to every single company there, give your resume to every single one, and try to get an interview at every single one. It's going to keep you pretty busy. Hopefully, if your resume is good enough, people will want to interview you. But it's really just good practice. First of all, it'll just help you be more comfortable with it when you're more familiar with the process. And second of all, you get a feel of what people are asking, how to answer, how to just like present yourself, things like that. A second thing is, I touched on this a few times earlier, is you got to be able to explain everything on your resume. People will only care if something's on your resume if it's relevant to the role. And if it's relevant to the role, they will ask you about it. So be prepared to answer any questions about what you did. For example, if someone asked me about this LED chaser when I was applying for my first job, I would need to explain, what it did, how I, made it have an adjustable sequence pattern and shake rate, all that stuff. I would have to explain, like, what is a think script scan? You know, what did I do for photo processing? How am I proficient with Python? What have I done in Python? What have I done in AutoCAD? Um, Probably no one's going to ask you any questions about MS Office experience, but how did I do that stuff? And being able to demonstrate that you actually have those skills. Another one is read up on the role in the company. People want to think that you're, excited about the job. And some of it I feel is, I wouldn't say egotistical, but people like to feel validated. And it is very validating when someone comes to you and they're like, wow, the job you're recruiting for looks so cool. I really want to work there. And you're like, yes, my job is cool. Thank you. So just showing some excitement, and just knowing what the company does and what the role does. That doesn't mean you need to put in like hours of research on each company, but like if you apply to Modine and you don't even know that we make thermal systems, I'm just like, why did you even apply? So just at the very least, just like know what the company does. And if it's a company you really want to work for, try to get a bit more in depth, like, read up on one of their product lines and make sure you go over the job description, and just have some knowledge of it going in, and think up ahead of time, why would I want to work there? Because they're probably going to ask you some sort of question about, why do you want to work here? And you should be able to answer that and not be able, it's not a good look if you just say like, well, I need to get a job somewhere, so I applied. Uh, have some reason to be excited about the company. And finally, one piece of advice for you is the recruiter's job is to fill their role. And so they want you to get this role. And so they are actually a good resource for, what is the hiring manager looking for when they're trying to fill this role. So you can, in that screening call, you're probably going to get with HR. Not every company actually does that, but most do. Um, ask like, hey, this looks like a really exciting opportunity. Can you give me any tips for what the hiring manager is looking for? Or, what are you looking for in a good candidate? And then you can take that feedback and you can use that for when you have the interview with the hiring manager. Now, what is a company actually looking for when they're hiring someone? There's basically three things. Experience honestly just ties into the other two, but when someone's evaluating you, one of the number one things they're looking for is experience. They want to know that, they're hiring you for a specific role to fill a specific purpose. And if you can show that you've already done that, that you're already capable of doing that, that is huge. And that's exactly what people want to see. If I want to hire someone to do, PCB design, someone who's actually done that before looks a million times more appealing than someone who hasn't done that before. Because if they've done it before, I know they can do it. And so experience can be two things. Number one thing is prior work experience. This is really the number one thing people are looking for. That's why you put your prior work experience, like your engineering experience, up top and big in front so people can see it. And then there's personal projects. Personal projects count as experience. They're not generally as appealing as work experience because they just aren't, honestly. There's just a different environment. Personal projects, you don't tend to have the same level of requirements you got to meet and stuff. So they're not as nice as prior work experience, but they still count and they still make a big difference. Even if you've never done PCB design before at a company, if I'm looking for an entry-level electrical engineer to do PCB design, someone who has done it in their free time is very appealing compared to someone who has never even heard of it. So culture fits. Where can you find out how to make yourself look like you're a good culture fit? Basically, you can check out the website. You can be like, okay, what does Modine value as a company? Unfortunately, most companies will put out just some standard boilerplate, like we value diversity, we value teamwork, we want everyone to be happy. Like everyone's going to say that. But if they have anything specific on there, then you can talk to that. You can say like, yeah, I value this and that. But most of all, ask the recruiter. Ask them what they're looking for in a culture fit for a candidate. And, base it on that. Finally, they're looking for a technical fit. Luckily, you get a lot more direction on this than culture fit, because you got a job description. The job description will say exactly what they're looking for. And so you go over the job description, you figure out how am I a technical fit on this, and be prepared to talk about it. Also, ask the recruiter. Now, your job here in an interview is to show that you are what the company is looking for. That's what they're looking for. They're trying to fill the role. You want to show that you can do it. And finally, you want to ask questions and show interest. I'm kind of rushing through these now because I realize I'm going way over time here. Any questions on this?
We're just going to give you the 5-minute warning, but we can go over too if people want to stay for questions, but just no 5 minutes.
Okay. So one thing is you want to ask questions. Asking questions is a good way to show that you actually care about where you're working. If you have no questions, it makes you seem uninterested, and then it also makes you seem uninquisitive, I guess. People are looking for someone who wants to learn and grow in their role. And if you're just like, I'll work anywhere, you don't really seem like that. So at first, I recommend making a list of questions. Just print it out, come in, and just straight up ask questions from the interviewers from the list. As you gain experience in your career, you'll just have a list in your head, just like, what kind of company do I want to work at? What do I want to know about this company? But until you get to that point, just write out a big list of things and just go through them, write it down, make notes. There are some common interview questions you should be prepared for. I actually have a bunch of examples, but I also only have like 4 minutes. Basically, it's split between generic questions that basically HR recommends. It's like, what's your greatest weakness? What's your biggest strength? Stuff like that. And then there's, more technical questions and questions that the hiring manager actually comes up with. I personally make a relatively standardized list of questions. Most hiring managers will do this, although some people will just wing it. But there's no great way to predict exactly what the questions are going to be, but you can generally guess. If someone has PCB design on their job description, they're going to ask you questions about PCB design, and so you should ask yourself, what would I ask someone if I wanted to know if they were good at PCB design, or what have I done with PCB design that I can show off, and just be prepared for any questions about PCB design in general. And then basically the hiring manager, it all comes down to basically a split between technical fit and culture fit. And so the hiring manager will be looking for the technical stuff, and then they'll be trying to figure out how well they fit into the team, or how well you fit into the team. That doesn't mean, how similar are you to other people in the team. Generally, a good hiring manager is going to be looking for diversity of, backgrounds and opinions. So if they have a bunch of people who are shy, they might be looking for someone who's more outgoing. Or if they have a bunch of people who are outgoing, they might be looking for someone who's more shy. So this doesn't mean that you need to be exactly like everyone else in the team. It's more about, how good are you at, just working with people. They'll probably ask you questions about, give me a time when you worked with someone, and, describe a time where you had to resolve a conflict in your team, stuff like that. I'll just jump to this last one. I got some hot tips for you. First of all, I've gone over most of these during the rest of this presentation, but my number one tip for you is practice your interviewing. Interview at places you don't want to work at, so that you're prepared for interviews at places you do want to work at. For a lot of people, interviewing is this horrible, nerve-wracking experience, and just get some experience with it, and just kind of try to chill out about it. Like, don't tie your self-esteem to getting a job at any particular company. Turn it into, I don't want to say like a hobby, but like, it doesn't really matter if someone rejects you. If you're just not going to work there, you weren't working there before. Nothing has changed. So just get used to interviewing at places and just try to release yourself from the anxiety. Just remind yourself that this, in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't really matter that much. Another hot tip for you is it's a lot easier to get internships or just jobs in general after you've had your first internship. Most people honestly kind of have to settle for their first internship, unfortunately. You just, if you're interviewing with a bunch of places, you're probably going to get offers from the places you don't want to work at before you get offers at the places you do want to work at. And that's just how it goes. Because companies like, I don't know, like Milwaukee Tool, Apple, whoever, their standards tend to be a bit higher than the smaller companies or the companies that are more boring and stuff like that. Do some personal projects in your spare time. If you don't have any experience with internships or anything, the number one thing people will look for is personal projects, because that's where your experience is, and people look for experience. So do some personal projects. They don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be like these big things. They can be pretty simple, but do some and then put it on your resume. And finally, keep your resume up to date, make it a living document. If you're actively looking for jobs, I mean, I don't really go in and update my resume every couple days because I don't really have to. I'm not, but if you're looking for a job, go in and update it every few days. If you're not looking for a job, every few months, just go in there. Not necessarily because you're looking for a new job right now, but because it helps you remind yourself what you've done, what you're doing right now, what you're good at. And yeah, all right, I just blasted through those last few slides. Sorry about that. We're 2 minutes over here. I'll take any questions you all have.
Any final questions for Darius? I like this hot tip slide. I think it's a good summary.
Thanks.
Well, all right. If there's no other questions, we can conclude it. We have Darius's info. Darius, thank you for giving us an hour and 2 minutes of your Friday. We appreciate it. This was a fantastic presentation. Oh, we got a late question coming in here from Steven. Go ahead, Steven.
This isn't really a question, but is there a way that we can get this somewhere in the IoT platform? Because I think this is really helpful, this hot tips page.
Sure. Yeah,
Yes.
I'll send this whole presentation to Ryan, and then Ryan can share it with you.
Yep. I'll upload this meeting recording, and then I can throw the presentation in there as well.
Oh, you get to see all my incoming emails on the recording too.
We got the NDA, don't worry.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.